Good morning, everyone. I hope that you're having a good time. So, this time, me and Miss Jemma Mondoyo will discuss the topic that was assigned to us, which is the human ecology and succession.
At the end of this chapter, students should have first discussed the scope of human and population ecology. Second, define the properties of population. Third, name and discuss the factors influencing population growth. Fourth, suggest ways to lessen the impact of rapid population growth. And fifth, analyze on environmental issue and after solutions.
So, what is ecology? Ecology is science of relationships and the study of interaction between organisms and their environment. So, human ecology is interdisciplinary. It is a systematic application of ecological concepts, principles, theory, and research methods to the study of human populations and communities. When we say interdisciplinary approach, both biological ecology and human have to draw intensively to other disciplines that are relevant in understanding the behavior of organisms. It also views the biological, environmental, demographic, and conditions of life of any people as an interrelated series of determinants of form and function in human cultures and social systems. So it combines the ideas and methods from several disciplines including anthropology, sociology, biology, economic, history, and archaeology. Population ecology studies organisms from point of view of the size and structure of their populations. Population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same geographic area at the same time. So the statistical study of populations and how they change over time is called demography. So there are two important measures of population. These are the population size and population density. So population size depends on how the population is defined. It could be a degree of reproductive isolation or a geographical range. When we say degree of reproductive isolation, the population size is the size of its gene pool. When we say geographical range, the population size is the number of individuals living in a particular area. So, population density. The population density is defined as simply the number of individuals per unit area. It may be additionally be determined in terms of some measure other than that population size per unit area, such as population mass per unit area. So, patterns of dispersion. Individual members of populations may be distributed over a geographical range in number of different ways including clump distribution, uniform distribution, and random distribution. So we will discuss this through the illustration. In uniform dispersion, individuals of population are spaced more or evenly or less evenly. One example of this comes from the plants that secrete toxins to inhibit all of the nearby individuals. So this phenomenon is called allelopathy. So we can also find uniform dispersion in animal species where individuals take out and defend their territories. So that is what we call the uniform dispersion. So another is the random dispersion. In random dispersion, individuals are distributed randomly, kalat-kalat, medyo kalat-kalat, without a predictable manner. So example comes from dandelions. Did you know the dandelions? So yun yung kanina yung sa GIF namin. So yun yung dandelion. And other plants that have a wind dispersed seeds. So nadadala sila ng wind. So the seeds spread widely and sprout wherever they happen to fall, as long as the environment is favorable. As long as the environment is favorable, has enough soil, water, nutrients, and light. So the last one is the clump dispersion. In clump dispersion, individuals are clustered. Grupo are clustered in groups. So this dispersion may be seen in plants that drop their seeds straight to the ground, such as oak trees or animals that live in groups, the schools of fish or the earths of elephants. So it also happens in habitats that are patchy with only some patches suitable to live in. So this is what we call the patterns of dispersion: the uniform dispersion, the random dispersion, and the clustered dispersion.
Let's proceed to the discussion of another properties of population, which is the demographics. So demographics, it is a statistical data relating to the population and particular groups within it. It acts as a vital statistics, especially those that can or will impact on the present and future population size. So under this, population, age structure, and population's gender ratio are of great importance or particular importance. So age structure, it will depend to the age distribution of an individuals within the population. So it shows that in human population, the population of younger people are greater than the older one. So in terms of populations in gender ratio, it talks about the population of male and female based on the population. So according to the World Health Organization or WHO, from birth, males outnumbered females. However, when they grow up, females outnumbered males. This is because males are perceived to have to be prone to danger like vehicular accidents. So that's why females outnumbered males when they grow up. So that is a demographic. Now let's proceed to the discussion of another properties of population, which is the population growth. So based on the PPT that we have created, so population growth, it is how the size of the population is changing over time. So that is a population growth. It is the result of if there is no limitation on growth within the environment. So there is an increase in the number of individuals in a population. If there is an increase of individuals within the population, it is called a population growth. So what is population? So population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same geographic area. So that is populations. So in this, populations undergo three distinct phases of its life cycle. So it belongs a population growth, population stability, and population decline or decline. So first, let us discuss what is population growth. This population growth is result from the reproduction, because reproduction is rapid and death rates are low. That's why there is a population growth. Let's proceed to the another phase of population, which is the population stability. So stability, with what do we mean by stability? There is stabilization, stable. The population is stable. So based on the PPT that we have created, again, that stability is often preceded by a crash since the growing population eventually outstrips its available resources. So if ever the population passes the maximum of the availability of its resources, then the population now will be stable. Population stability is have a longest pace within the population life cycle. Let's proceed to another phase of population, which is the decline. The population decline tells you that there is a decrease in the number of individuals in the population. So because of certain factors like overkilling, that influences the population growth, and then eventually the population becomes extinct. So when the population becomes extinct, so therefore the population is declining. Let's proceed to the discussion of the factors influencing the population growth. So nearly all populations will tend to grow exponentially as long as there is resources available or the resources are unlimited. So most populations have exponential to expand at an exponential rate because of reproduction. So reproduction basically is the basis of why there is a population growth. So this is because population means adding new individuals within the population. So birth rate and death rates are two basic factors that affect the rate of population growth. Birth rate or crude birth rate is the number of live births per 1,000 population in a given year. So death rate is the term used to define the number of deaths every year per 1,000 people in a population. So that is the difference between the birth rate and the death rate. So intrinsic rate of increase is the difference between birth and death rate. So if it will gives you a positive result, it indicates that there is a growing population. However, if it is a negative, it indicates that there is a shrinking of population. So there is a declining of population. And if ever the result is zero, so there is no change in the population. So the population is stable. So that is the factors influencing the population growth, the birth rate and the death rate. Looking in the diagram in the right, that this is the two modes of population growth, the exponential curve and the S-shaped curve. So let's discuss the exponential curve. So exponential curve, also known as the G curve, it occurs when there is no limit to population size. This is due to the unlimited natural resources. Because if there is unlimited natural resources, it gives you a G shape that will indicate that there is an exponential curve. If the resources are limited, populations exhibit logistic growth. When the carrying capacity of the environment is rich, it will result in an S-shaped curve, as you can see in the diagram in the right. So that is the exponential curve and the logistic growth. So, let's discuss the population growth is potential related to life history. So I will read to you our PPT. Life history refers to the age of sexual maturity, age of death, and other events in that individual's lifetime that influence reproductive traits. So that is a life history. So the age within its individual cycle at which an organism reproduces affects the rate of population increase. So some organisms grow fast, reproduce quickly, and have abundant offspring in each reproductive cycle. But there are also organisms that grow slowly, reproduce late, and reproduce very minimal offspring. So that's why it is related to the life history of an organism. Several basic controls govern population size. So what governs the population size? The environment is the ultimate cause of population to stabilize. So environment, because we rely and everything relies on environment, it will depends, the stabilization depends on environment. So physical and biological environment are two factors that control or govern the population size. So, what is physical environment? So, physical environment includes food, shelter, and water supply, space availability, and for plants, the soil and the light. So, if one of these affect the population size, so because there are some organisms that grows because of food, and there are some organisms that depends on the shelter to reproduce, the water supply, the space availability, and for plants, for soil and the light. So, the use of Lebes's law of the minimum, it states that the growth is dictated not by total resources available but by the scarcest resources or the limiting factors. So that is the law of the minimum based on the Liebig's law. So Liebig, he is the one who proposed that law of minimum. So in another point of view, biological environment involve niche overlap and competition. So what is niche overlap and competition? It is when different species involved uses the same resources which they compete. So that is a niche competition. When one species eliminates the second species from the area, it is termed as competitive exclusion. And the niche overlap is minimal if two different species compete with one resources but have another sources available. So
that's the several basic controls governed by population size.
So basically, human can greatly affect the environment. So human populations have continued to increase due to the use of technologies. So that has disrupted the natural populations. So next is pollution. Pollutants can generally releases of substances into the air and the water. So it could be the possible cause or reasons for soil pollution and water pollution. Next is pesticides and competition. So removal of competing species can cause ecological release of a population explosion in that species competition. Then removal of predators. Predator release is common where human hunt, trapped, or otherwise reduce predator population, so allowing the prey populations to increase kasi nga nagre-remove ng predators due to hunting. Next, we have introduction to new species. So introduction of exotic or alien non-native species into new areas is perhaps the greatest single factor to affect natural population. So yung mga baguhan nagka-apekto din sa population within that environment. So next is the altering population growth. So humans can remove or alter the constraints of population size with good or bad consequences. So these are the factors affecting the population growth of the individuals of the population in that particular environment. So there are changes in biological environment and it is occur in three ways. So first is the species introduction, overhunting, and secondary extinction. Species introduction. An exotic species is introduced into an area where it may be no predators to control its population size or where it can greatly outcompete native organisms. So next is overhunting. So when a predator population increases or becomes more efficient at killing the prey population may decline or go to extinct. So good example of that is the prehistory, a human prehistory, where may have caused the extinction of mammoths and mastodons. So, due to increase of human hunting skill, kasi nga yun lang yung ginagawa nila, nag-hunt lang sila. Next is secondary extinction. So loss of food species can cause migration or extinction of any species that depends largely or solely on that species as a food source. So nagmamigrate sila kasi nga wala na yung pagkain, wala nang pagkain yung area na kung saan doon sila nakatira. So kailangan nilang lumipat to search for food. So overkill is the shooting, the trapping, or hunting of species usually for sport or economic reasons. And the death of one species or population can cause the decline or elimination of a secondary elimination of organisms. So that process is called a secondary extinction.
Ecological succession proceeded with primary succession and secondary succession. So what is a primary succession? So primary succession begins in a bare area where no life has existed. So this is succession that begins in new habitat like volcanic ash, glacial deposits, and or bare rock. The pioneer succession have high level of ecological tolerance because they tolerated the different factors like in the volcanic ash. So they have a very high level of ecological tolerance. And in secondary succession, on the other hand, it follows a disruption of pre-existing community. The disturbance like fire, withdrawn, or logging, and that recolonized by living things. So there is the disturbance like in the fire. So species must have the survival qualities in coping environmental changes. For another factor of succession is autogenic and allogenic succession. So autogenic succession is a term used to describe the result from change brought by the organisms themselves. So if there's a change within the organisms themselves, so that is autogenic succession. The change from abandoned agricultural field to a mature forest is an example of an autogenic succession. So it talks about the lifespan of organisms in the community. So what all throughout the lifespan of an organism within the community, how it changes, that is autogenic succession. Autogenic succession, on the other hand, is results from factor external to the community. The principal change comes from the primarily from outside the community, like climate change and massive disturbance. Example of this is the succession of phytoplankton communities that is present in the lake. So that is the example of allogenic succession. Here, succession occurs in the time scale of the disturbance. So autogenic is the lifespan of an organism, while allogenic is a time scale of the disturbance. So there is a change. So that is the difference between autogenic and allogenic succession. About more on succession in ecology, let us add the list the autotrophic and heterotropic succession. So, succession that begins in an anorganic environment and characterized by early and continued dominance by autotrophic organisms is what we call an autotrophic succession. So, both primary and secondary succession are under in this type of succession, the autotrophic. So, in heterotropic succession, it is characterized by early dominance of heterotrophs. So, predominantly, it is an organic matter. For example, in a stream heavily polluted with sewage, here, energy is maximum at first, but eventually, in the long run, it gradually declines. So that is the difference between the autotrophic and heterotropic succession. Changes within the structure and function of community result from natural selection of individuals within the current environment.
So there are three mechanisms by which species may replace each other. So first,
type oscillation hypothesis. It states that invasion of later species depends on conditions created by earlier colonists. So here, the succession thus proceeds because of the effects of species on their environment. The effect of the earlier colonists to their environment. So that is the type oscillation hypothesis. So second, the tolerance hypothesis. It suggests that later successional species tolerate lower levels of resources than earlier occupants. So here, succession proceeds despite the resistance of earlier colonists. So that is the tolerance hypothesis. So third, the inhibition hypothesis. Succession proceeds toward dominance by longer-lived species. So
That is the three mechanisms by which species may replace each other.
ecological succession shows the progressive change in an ecological community. So succession may be in primary, secondary succession, or from an autotrophic, heterotrophic, and autogenic and allogenic succession. And this succession gives an adverse effect in the composition or structure in an ecological community. So because of this ecological succession, that shapes ecology, that shapes ecological community. So that summarizes all. That's our report about human population and ecological succession. So good day.